Joining us now, New York Times White House correspondent Tyler Pager, Slate senior editor and host of the Amicus podcast, Dahlia Lithwick. She's also an MSNBC law and politics analyst and MSNBC political analyst and former press secretary to former House Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan. Brendan Buck. All right, Dahlia, hate speech. Has it been tested by the Supreme Court before?
You know who else says there's no such thing as hate speech, Katie? Was Charlie Kirk, who said it does not exist in America. There's ugly speech, there's gross speech, there's evil speech. All of it is protected by the First Amendment. Keep America free. I think that the notion that there's this new class of speech that is called hate speech and that Pam Bondi is going to invent it, classify it, prosecute it, and criminalize it is so much a part of the problem that you all were just talking about, which is it looks incredibly opportunistic and tone deaf. And, we do have First Amendment exceptions. There's incitement, there's fighting words, there's a whole bunch of classes of speech that, in fact, don't garner First Amendment protection, but none of the stuff she listed is that.
What about the 1969 case, the Brandenburg case versus the state of Ohio? This is when the Supreme Court tested hate speech, Dahlia.
Yeah, this is one of those exceptions that exist to the First Amendment protections. But we should be really clear that, and by the way, there are very, very smart people who say that it's not an amazing thing that we stopped constructing exceptions to the First Amendment in a time, before social media, before mass media, when people would say things that would rile up a crowd, that people would say things that looked as though they could incite, an imminent lawless response. But those are the categories we live with. And the court has been really, really reluctant to add new classifications. And so even if you look at Brandenburg and the other cases that say, look, not all speech globally is protected, there are very, very, very specific rules about what incitement to imminent lawlessness is. There are very, very specific ways to cabin what kind of speech is unprotected. And it's simply not, I don't love the people that you love. That's just not part of it. And if we want to have a conversation about the intersection between the First Amendment and the Second Amendment and all the dangerous ways that incitement has changed in 100 years, we can have that conversation, but I don't think it should be in Pam Bondi's hands to sort of lead that conversation.
Define that line, yeah. Chris O'Leary is still with us as well, and I'm going to bring him in. Can you just tell us what are the definitions to speech that is not protected under the First Amendment?
So the federal statute that FBI agents would be pursuing for imminent threats would be, so that's where, your hate speech or other First Amendment speech crosses over the line. Under Brandenburg, it needs to be very specific. It can't be general. It can't be talking about, this broad thing. It has to be, I'm going to attack this person tomorrow. It has to be imminent. So it can't be at some point in time. It has to be very imminent. And you actually have to have the capability. It can't be aspirational. So if you say, I'm going to use a gun to do this, but you have no ability to get a gun or anything else. And so those are things as a Title 18 statute that governs it. Still very hard to charge, but Brandenburg was a test of the KKK and was what they were doing, either their speech or burning crosses. Was that still protected by the First Amendment? And as distasteful as it is, the court found that it was.
Tyler, what is the White House considering hate speech? What do they define? How do they define it?
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing today that Pam Bondi's office is trying to clarify and walk back these comments, putting out a statement saying that what she was trying to refer to was speech that incites violence, as the previous guest just outlined, it's clear that there's not hate speech that she can prosecute. But obviously, this is the Attorney General, so the words that come out of her mouth carry a lot of weight. I mean, I think what the White House is making clear is that they are targeting groups and institutions that they see or they are blaming responsible for protests and violence. But what's unclear is exactly how they plan to carry out these sorts of campaigns, what laws they are planning to use to restrict or try to restrict some of these groups. I think right now we're seeing a lot of rhetoric from senior officials, the president included and the vice president, but I think we're pushing for some more clarity about exactly how they intend to try to operationalize some of these threats that they're posing against various groups that they're blaming for some violence.
How are they defining left-wing organizations? How broad is that, Tyler?
I mean, that is a great question, Katie. And I think we have tried to push them on very specific examples of who they are talking about. We've heard President Trump talk about George Soros and Open Society's foundations, his umbrella organization, saying that he wants to pursue RICO charges against them, blaming them for, funding protests and violence. George Soros's foundation has denied having any role in that. But we have heard them throw out various sorts of organizations as examples. But in terms of, the label or the moniker left-wing, radical left-wing, President Trump has largely used that label for any of his political opponents, including people like Joe Biden and, Barack Obama. So it is very unclear how wide-ranging this effort is going to be. But, what is clear is that they are very determined to try to hold these organizations, in some sort of accountability. But what that looks like, I think, needs more clarity.
Brendan, for the last 4 to 8 years, Republicans have been calling out the left for cancel culture, saying that it's illiberal. Now they're being criticized for trying to do the same thing. You have Rand Paul saying you have the right to say things, but many people have morals clauses in their contract or conduct clauses. My guess is that you have to behave in a certain way, he says. You also have Vance saying call them out if you see them saying something that you think is wrong, call their employer, get them fired. What's going on with this?
Yeah, well, look, I have to say, it's hard to look at this and not remember that the people involved here were personal friends with Charlie Kirk. And so I want to at least acknowledge that some of this may just be emotion. At the same time, look, there's a difference between an employer thinking their employee acted inappropriately and reflected poorly on their organization and have a problem with that. That's very different than the power of the state coming down. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of that conservative pushback that you've talked about. It has been core to conservatism, and I would argue the Constitution forever, that there is no such thing as prosecuting thought. We don't prosecute thought. Speech and thought are protected. And I would encourage anybody on the right who is thinking about going down this road to think of the precedent that this now would be setting if you are defining going after people just broadly as the left. And look, we dealt with this a bit when I was, you may recall there was an issue with the IRS targeting conservative organizations in the Tea Party movement. And that was a huge deal on the right. The government has no role in coming after people based on their ideology, point blank. And if we are extending hate speech into broadly just groups on the left, I shudder to think what we would say if it was she was on the other foot. If an administration, a Democratic administration, was saying we are just going to broadly target groups on the right. I'm hoping that with some time and some healing, that they'll step back for this. And I think what Pam Bondi trying to clarify her statement is a good first step. There's going to be a lot of conservatives who have a lot of problem with this kind of thing, but I'm also not terribly convinced that conservatives on the internet are going to convince this administration to back off. I think they're just going to need to reflect on what they're doing and making sure that their ire is properly targeted. It has been a long-standing conservative view that the person who is responsible for a crime is the person who did the crime, and I think hopefully that will carry.
Well,
the day.
that was going to be my second question. I mean, how much influence is someone like Brit Hume or Eric Erickson or Tim Carney of AEI going to have, or Charlie Kirk himself, his own words about hate speech not existing? As Dahlia mentioned at the top, here's that tweet about it from, I believe this is 2017, Charlie Kirk and his own words on that. So how much, you don't think they're going to have all that much influence is, I guess, what you're saying?
Well, I mean, the fact that she had to clarify her remarks already is not nothing. But it's also, it's not emotionally satisfying to show restraint. And I understand that. And I think what we have seen is the people who are in power around Donald Trump are probably more likely going to side with whatever is emotionally satisfying to the president than they are principled or longstanding or conservative views. So let's hope that cooler heads prevail in terms of this sort of wide net that seems to be being cast here, and keep our focus on what we have long always believed as conservatives, and believe in the Constitution of who ultimately is responsible for something.
Yeah, it has been a very, very emotional, very hot week. Brendan Buck, Dahlia Lithwick, Chris O'Leary, thank you.